Hello, Max.
Hi, David.
Hey, there you are, my friend. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you very well.
Oh, great, great. And you're coming through crystal clear here. Well, I'm actually really glad to get in touch with you. I was referred to you, as we saw in that discussion on Facebook, by a friend of mine there. And I know you've been doing a lot of great work regarding the geoengineering, chemtrails, talking about Agenda 21, and ultimately just all around centralization of control that we see going on in the world, and all of these different things that we are all investigating and trying to figure out. So it's actually really great to finally be able to connect with you, my friend. So thanks for getting in touch with me and agreeing to come on.
Yeah, no, that's great. I welcome every opportunity to hopefully reach some more people and just share the information I've found. It's build the bigger picture, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it's there's so much, there's so many layers of so many topics that one could get into, but I wondered if maybe we could get started here and give the listeners, and this is a pre-recorded interview, Max, we're not live, but I'm going to be basically releasing this right after and getting as many listeners as possible and being able to introduce them to what you do and the subjects that you've been researching. And I'm here in Toronto, Canada, so I believe you're originally from Australia, but you're out there in Paris at the moment?
Actually, people do make that mistake. I lived in Australia.
Okay.
Uh, I was brought up in the south of England, and my parents are Scottish, so I went to spend a lot of time in Scotland when I was growing up. I've kind of lived. I lived in Germany for 5 years. I now live in France. I lived in Australia for a couple of years. But I think my time in Australia, I guess sometimes I got a little bit of the Australian accent that creeps in every now and again. I don't know why.
No, that's great. Well, so you've been around, and that's great. You've been doing. I think you originally had a blog website. Is that still? Are you still contributing to that? I believe it was Mr. Max Bliss. Do you still have that website running, or any other sites that you're involved with?
Yeah, it's still running actually. Well, and I don't actually contribute to that one anymore. What I decided I wanted to do was to have a website which I'm just developing, and I'm not very experienced at this, so it's a bit of a learning curve, but I feel I need to do this. And it's called therealinstitute.com with dashes in between the Real Institute just to spread it out.
Okay, great. Yeah, although if is it live right now? I can let people know
Yes,
about it.
you can have a look at it now. Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
it's very, very basic and it's got very little content. I started it earlier this year, but I got distracted and I stopped doing it. And just recently, I've made that decision that I need to do that. I need to put as much of my evidence into the archives, into articles, so that people don't have to rely on YouTube or Facebook to find me and to find my articles, find my information. So,
Absolutely, and I'm a big fan of people that put information and a mix of their opinion with data and evidence. That way, people coming onto the site can actually do their own research, but also hear what you have to say after doing the research that you've done. So it's great. We need it as much as we can, as I'm sure you're aware. We're in the middle of a information war on the internet, trying to keep websites up, trying to keep YouTube videos up, trying to get every means at our disposal to work properly and get out to as many people as you possibly can. So I definitely salute you, and I'm glad to see that you have something there. If you ever need any help, let me know, because I've done a little bit of my own websites and whatnot, and there is some very great tools out there that might make life a little bit easier for you.
well, I tell you, I'm a person, right? I never intended to become an activist. I've become one, but I'm not very technically minded. With the computers, I am very practical, but it's just sort of like it's a bit like form filling. I can do it so much, but then after a while, I kind of come to a stop. So one of the things is I use WordPress, and I think it's a little bit. It takes a bit of getting used to.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm the same. I was never one of the people as well that was trying to be out there and do this kind of work, or had a lot of the technical information. And you know what? Even people that were trained on how things used to work, things are changing so quickly now, and especially with social media changing constantly, and all these new internet cyber security issues that people are having now. It's a totally different world week by week online and is changing so quickly. So it's very difficult. And I think a lot of people need to keep that in mind when they're looking at sites like ours and the work that we're doing, is that we are all trying to put out the best quality information that we can, deliver it in a way that's easy to understand. But we're also up against a great learning curve that's constantly changing and adapting. And I think there's more reasons behind why that's the case. But either way, bear with us, folks. We are all working to solve these issues and make it a lot easier for us to do it. We don't have the millions and billions of dollars at our disposal that the mainstream media has. So this is where you're going to get grassroots, raw, unedited information. And I think it's important to support those that are doing that great work. Now, Max, let's get into a little bit about your background and what originally drove you to do this. You said originally your intention wasn't to become an activist, but you've put out some great work and you've been getting around and reaching a lot of people. What was it that inspired you to question your reality, to look around at what was going on in the world, and to then move up a notch and actually start trying to communicate the message that you're trying to communicate today?
Well, I guess in my lifetime, as a child, I was always inquisitive about what was going on in the world and questioning why we were going to war all the time. So that was sort of like my early years, questioning things like that. I went to quite a few demonstrations and protests, and different things happened in my life. I was in the British Army for a couple of years when I was very young, and a good friend of mine was killed. I think he was murdered. And the British Army and the government just wanted to cover up the situation. And that really opened up my eyes to the way that governments are not what our perception of them is. You know, we've told lots of lies. So I think that was another part of my life that helped wake me up. And then basically I think I stopped watching television, started waking up, and
that's always a big one, eh?
Yeah, television is a big turning point. If you can, I wrote about it earlier on Facebook. This is a real event. I was learning to become a bricklayer after I'd left the army, and my sister was working around the corner in an old people's home, in a nursing home, and I started dropping in there for lunch, and there was an old guy whom I started to chat with, and he was a really interesting guy, very worldly, very politically aware, and he started to fascinate me. He was someone I found very, very interesting, and I just had this thought one day when I was heading back to work that I wonder what it would be like if somebody paid me that kind of interest, and I started to think what would happen about my life. And at that time, I was about 20, breakfast television had just started in the UK. And basically when I used to wake up, they used to go on, so I'd know what the weather was and watch a bit of the news. And that used to be on for about an hour in the background, really. Mm. And then later on, I'd get home and the TV would just go on out of habit. And basically I worked out I was watching like 4 to 5 hours TV. Even if I wasn't sitting watching it, it was on. And I just worked out that that was almost a third of my waking life. And it was just appalling to me. So that was a turning point about 20, just stop watching TV.
And then I guess from there, you've got all this extra time on your hands, and then you start questioning things, and then you have curiosities and all these things. And then you start reading books, and you start watching documentaries, and you start following multiple threads of information. I'm not trying to tell your story for you, Max, but I'm just sharing that that's kind of how it happened for me. You know?
Yeah, and I started going to night school and getting educated, and I was just curious and just wanted to learn. So I did some O levels, did 4 A levels, and wanted to go to university. But then I found out that just going to university was basically like sort of bashing a square peg in a round hole. I just couldn't conform to the whole structure of the system. So basically. I was quite happy being a builder, and I started travelling around, lived in Germany, lived in Australia, and came back to the UK. And every time I went away from the UK and came back again, I could see massive changes in society at such a pace that I was aware that there must be an agenda. And it was always on my mind. And I guess now I look at my development and my awakening, and I guess The 9/11 event certainly was a wake-up call.
Yeah.
And all the illegal wars. I was very much against the Iraq war, both of them actually, in '91 and 2003. And I was on a demonstration in London where there were over 1 million people in March 2003.
Wow.
And it was a tremendous, tremendous day with people of all ages, all race, colour and creed. Everyone was there. You know, it's really wonderful to see such a full representation of all the people in the UK. And for that day, it was a powerful day. And I felt so connected with all of these different people and reassured that people really did care. And I thought, you know, the government will have to they'll have to listen on this. And of course, it was totally ignored, and you know, they went to war, and everyone knows the history. But it was a crushing affair that we were totally ignored, and I think that created a lot of apathy.
And you know, also too, Max, I think that is so much proof in itself. And people listening to this that may doubt what we're discussing here, just to see that when the people, an overwhelming majority of people are against a particular action, namely, you know, going to another country and bombing and killing people, when so many people are against that and they do it anyways, and this happens many, 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 many times over, we really need to understand that when we're told through the media and education and all of our different elements within society that convince us that we have a say, that we're free, that our voice is heard, that we elect our legal representatives and all of this, that of course is an absolute farce. And I just think that I'm sure, Max, when you saw that and the people that were there, that must have been a huge wake-up call for everybody that was there, to see that so many people had come to resist something and to speak out against it, and yet it still happened.
Yes, and I think that's confirmation that the governments are working with an agenda, and they really don't represent the people. And I think that was that may have been a mistake. You know, I think that was a gamble because a lot of people haven't forgotten that, and that made a scar in their consciousness. You know, a lot of people realise that the government do not represent us; they are just doing their own thing. They've got their own agenda, and it doesn't matter what we think, and that hasn't left. You know, a lot of people got that taste in their mouth. It's bitter, and people are not happy about it. And if you look to Europe, many of the nations in Europe have coalition governments, and you know that's a real indicator that the government system is not working. People have lost faith in the system, and that's because obviously we've got this runaway train that is the New World Order and the globalist elites, the criminal elites, marching ahead very quickly with their agenda, and people, for various different reasons, for lots of different issues that are important to different people, those issues are all converging right now, and you know there's becoming an awakening for whatever reason, whichever issue resonates with different people, and I think that we are approaching a time now of critical mass where most people are dissatisfied with the fake democracy we have, and they're totally dissatisfied with the obvious agenda that continues regardless of which party has power. We see the same agenda continuing through regardless. So we can see democracy is just an illusion.
And that's such a valid point. I wanted to maybe start there before we get into some of the other subjects that I wanted to speak with you about, Max, which is that we are given the illusion that, of course, we have this free choice, or we have a free democracy or republic or whatever we are in belief of, and yet we see nothing but the opposite taking place. A lot of people would say, oh, well, that means it's Barack Obama's fault or Stephen Harper's fault or any of these other individual political figures. And yet you and I both know that clearly behind those political masks, there are lobbyist groups. There is, of course, the advent of the military-industrial complex and all these other, I guess, special interest groups and influences on government. And then when you go behind the layers even further, you start to see that there's these different groups and roundtables and secret organizations. And this has been exposed countless times over the last 50, 60 years, and especially in recent history. But what's your take on how that process works? And maybe you can explain to people what you've discovered when you start with that sort of surface level, and then you really start to dig down to the guts of what's really operating behind government here.
Well, in my own personal investigations, I guess I, I, I started looking at Agenda 21, and I started looking at the people who were at the root of Agenda 21 in the past, and basically just kept chasing the history backwards and forwards. And when I was younger, I always asked about the wars, even though I did join the army. That was pretty much to get away from home, though. But I looked to the United Nations. Who set up the United Nations? And the United Nations came as a result of a world war. But before that, there was the League of Nations, and that came because of a world war. And prior to that, if you keep going back, we go to like the Congress of Vienna in 1816. And this was an attempt by the oligarchy of the colonial powers, of the European powers, to create one world government. That was in 1816. And basically, I keep on looking back to history with verifiable information to make sure it's correct. And basically, if people do take the time to look at events and look at the people involved in the events, and it becomes apparent there's a pattern there. There's always the key families. There's always the same nations involved. It's I think they call it. We're talking about the richest of the rich, the most obscenely wealthy people. It does seem to be the same recurring families or royal, or, members of royalty over the years. Basically, we're talking about like the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers. There's a whole list of names I can't recite actually, but basically it all revolves around taking control of everything through the corporations, through the banks, through the industrial military complex. But going further back, it goes back to controlling the royals, and the royals kind of vying for hierarchy and working with the Vatican. And I mean, if we really get down to the nuts and bolts of it, my own research actually suggests that there is like it's awkward to say it, but I think it's factual that there's a cult within the hierarchy of the Jewish community, which it's a very touchy, sensitive issue to talk about because all the things that have happened with them. But if we look to who runs all the banks, look to who runs all the corporations, and look to all the most powerful lobby groups controlling governments, it's unavoidable.
Well, it's interesting because when we were talking about how there's this illusion of what is put out as the decision makers, right, as this government, and then there's these elements that run behind it. I would agree with you that the same thing is true behind various religious organizations, behind various charitable organizations or philanthropist organizations or whatnot. There's always the surface level, and then there's what's really going on behind it. And I think that whatever organization, I kind of look at it like the mafia, the way the mafia operates, but you just kind of take that up.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? To infiltrate.
The mafia is a set-up. Organized crime is a part of the control matrix.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just...
The arm of the matrix is there. That is what they use. I mean, it becomes so apparent when you look at the way they've set up the various societies, whether it's the Fabian Society or the Freemasons, or even further back than that, the Templars. And the Templars, what did they want to do? They wanted to re-establish the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. And they were the first international bankers.
No one would say, oh, the Templars came out of a Jewish order. But then when you really study the history of that, and you see that, again, there's these sort of secret handshakes that take place behind the scenes, and you start to wonder, oh, well, maybe all of this this religion, that religion, this political group, that political group. Maybe that's all just for the marketplace, and yet behind the scenes, there's something way, way, way bigger going on, right?
I actually, I must point out to anyone listening, I don't consider myself to be anti-Semitic or against Jewish people. I know Jewish people, it's not, that's not the case, but I'm just trying to understand what's really been going on in the world. And I look, I try to research information, and basically it's unavoidable that there's a hierarchy within the Jewish community that's always, it's the same within the Jewish community. They've got layers of the onion just as much as the way we're understanding the way things are.
Yeah.
So it's not all Jewish people, but it's unavoidable. If I found out, I'm quite convinced that there was the situation with the Khazars, which I think many people will know about, that the Khazars were a warrior group that emerged following the Roman Empire, towards the end of the Roman Empire, and they controlled the Silk Road, the meeting of the East and the West at the time. It was a very important trade area to have. You also had a situation where Rome split into two halves. You had East and West, and the East part became known as the Byzantine Empire. Well, there was an alignment made with the Byzantine Empire, with the Khazarians, and the son of the king from the Kurgan was to marry the daughter of the emperor, and the upshot from that was Pope Leo III in 740 AD. So the Khazars have had a foothold within the Vatican since then, and then later, during the Middle Ages, you had the Habsburg dynasty emerge from Europe.
Yeah, yeah.
And they've been infiltrated with this hierarchy, this cult within the synagogue of Satan. And basically, they've infiltrated them, and they were pretty much dominant within running the Vatican for many hundreds of years. So you've got situations where the layers of control have been put in place over centuries, many centuries. And these people are very, very single-minded. I think they've had their plan for global domination for hundreds of thousands of years, maybe. It's they seem to be controlling society. I'll give you an example. William the Conqueror was a French nobleman from Normandy who invaded England in 1066. Obviously, it's quite famous historically. What I found out was, I was reading about the connections to the Catholic Church, and that the Pope had ordered William the Conqueror, when he was to invade England, to destroy all the Christian churches that were not Catholic, so that all new churches, destroy them, rebuild new churches, and everything would become Catholic, so they could tithe the people. That means they wanted to tax the people. They wanted to take over. So William the Conqueror was doing it on behalf of the Vatican. William the Conqueror also brought the Jews from Rouen in northern France, in Normandy, to England at that time. But what he did when he invaded is he left the city of London, which is a square mile city from the Roman times, and it used to have Roman fortifications around it. He left that intact. But within the city of London were the old Roman moneylenders, who, if you go onto the Lehman Brothers website, the famous bank, they were quite proud and boast that the Romans used the Jews because they were honest and respected moneylenders. So we're looking at a situation where, even back then, there appears to have been a real conspiracy developing, where they were trying to take over territory and extend their network of control.
And I guess it's just taken so many forms, whereas back then they were obviously still using that financial element and the whole, religious mind control type element. And then yet today it's not as well. I mean, they're still using the military aspect for conquest, but here in the West, we see it translated as more of the propaganda coming from the media. It's a totally different kind of war in our modern time. But back then, it was definitely the process of building and maintaining and managing an empire. And now I think they're trying to do the same, and then obviously continue with their expansion. And this is, I guess, what would be associated with what's going on with the Middle East, and how there is this constant banging of the war drums to go in and take over land, resources, and people overseas. And we're here even in Canada. We've got this propaganda constantly out there that this is what we need to do to save ourselves from being attacked by terrorism or whatnot. And when you were referencing talking about history, these types of tactics have been used for centuries, of this whole idea that there's some kind of an enemy out there or some kind of a threat that we need to defend ourselves against. And in doing that, going through that process of defending ourselves, the people end up getting more enslaved on their own land, right?
Yeah, I think I feel that I've confirmed and established in my mind is that pretty much most wars are really about changing the attitude of the people under the control of the oligarchy within those states, i.e., at the top levels, the various different governments or the royalties or the ruling oligarchy have been so well penetrated. It's about controlling the people that they control. And it's like a great game. It's like, for example, World War One and World War Two were definitely set up and funded by both sides. By the same people. They had their objectives that they wanted to get. One of the things they wanted from World War One, apart from securing the oil by defeating the Ottoman Empire, was to create one world government. But that didn't quite work. People didn't quite want it. And that kind of failed. And then with the Second World War, it's a similar thing. They wanted the European Union, and they also wanted to set up Israel. And if without World War II, that would never have happened. Or it wouldn't have happened that way anyway. Maybe it might have happened another way. But I can see that basically these people have been in control for a very, very long time. It's basically one of the things I looked to was the Age of Enlightenment. And this was a time in the 17th century and the 18th century where all the Freemasons of the Royal Society, the philosophers and scientists of the day, because they basically tried to work out how they could restructure the whole of society and replace religion using science as a new religion and the way to control society. And I think if we look to what was happening at those days in that time, you had the Illuminati being funded by the Rothschild family and being set up. And I think, Illuminati, Age of Enlightenment, seems a very close link there. Pretty much the same agenda. And they were setting up all these different foundations, and they were setting up different organizations to have influence over society and to change society. And it certainly seems, it's apparent now what they're working towards and what they're doing. And we cannot let these people get away with mass murder, to create horrendous wars, to create such massive changes and use suffering as the way to do that. And this is where the Jewish people were victimized by the Zionists, by the extremist Jews. Interestingly, when they had the first Zionist conference, they wanted to have it in Munich. But the Jews of Munich chased them out and said they would not let them have it there because they were extremists. And they were forced to go to Switzerland to have the first Zionist conference. And basically, they wanted to move these people to go and to set up Jerusalem and to set up Israel. And they had to create the war. I am actually now of the opinion that Hitler, there's an awful lot of evidence now to suggest that the Nazi Party, in fact, the Socialist Party was set up by a man called Mordecai Hess, who was a Jewish man, who was also involved with communism. And I'm actually of the opinion that there's a great deal of Zionist-Nazi collaboration. Like, for example, there's a 1993 transfer agreement where Hitler agreed to sent 60,000 Jews to Israel, help them go there to set up with an agreement that they would then buy products from Germany. So there's collaboration going on there, and it could easily be that. There's a man called Greg Hallett who suggests that Hitler was a double agent, and that Hitler had definitely spent time in the UK in 1913.
Was he the author of the book Hitler Was a British Agent? Was that the author, or was that a different?
No, you're right. That is Greg Hallett. Yeah. He's from New Zealand, I think, and Hitler definitely did stay with his brother-in-law in I think it was Liverpool for 6 months or so. And Greg Hallett suggests that he went to have some training and get conditioned for the coming role he was to play. And then he went back for the First World War and did what he had to do there, and then obviously his life progressed. But if we look at what was happening in Germany, their biggest fear was that Bolshevism, which was obviously run by predominantly by Jews, was absolutely devastating in Russia, and they had killed like millions and millions of Russians while they were purging the country of dissidents as they were taking over the revolution. And of course, the revolution, we now know, was funded by American financiers from Wall Street, which were predominantly Jewish. And basically, the idea was that the people in Germany would be so frightened that Germany would be next. As the Bolshevik Revolution was spreading through Europe, it wasn't just in Russia. There was a war between Poland in 1921. It was quite a terrible war for 3 years. And that was between the Bolshevik Jews from Russia trying to take over the territory of Poland. So there was a great fear, because obviously Germany's a bordering nation with Poland. There was a great fear that they would be next, because Germany had been suffering with the repatriation, the huge costs of the fight they had to pay for World War One. They were economically very vulnerable and weak. So when you've got a situation like we have now with all the austerity and all the financial problems, people are more susceptible to massive changes. People are weak and vulnerable and distracted, and they can't see what's going on.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So there was that situation, and before World War II and the rise of the Nazi Party was funded by outside Western, by London and by Wall Street. To get them strong, they had deals with different corporations like General Electric Germany and IG Farben and various other
Union Banking, and this was where even the Bush family gets involved. You got like Prescott Bush. I think he even went to court over this. Like people aren't aware of exactly how documented this is.
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely correct. And basically, it looks like towards the beginning of World War One. The Bolsheviks. There's a lot of Jewish people in Poland. It's a very large. There was a large percentage, and obviously they were sympathetic to the Bolsheviks, because I think the Jewish people get used basically, and I think they're pretty heavily indoctrinated with their religion, just as much as Catholics are and everyone else. But basically, I think they're quite vulnerable. They get taught that they're victims. They need to stand up. They need to look after each other. They've got their motivations that gets drummed into them. And basically, there was an element in Poland that people have to understand. There's lots of ethnic Germans living in Poland. And that's because if you think about where Berlin, the capital city of Germany, is, it's only 30 kilometers from the Polish border. And that's because a big part of Poland used to be part of Germany, Prussia. If you hear of Prussians and the proud Prussians, whatever that we hear about Nazis, it's because Poland, Poland's been a very disputed country, and I feel sorry for the Polish people. They've been in the midst of war for centuries. But basically, in Poland, before the Second World War, there was a series of massacres of ethnic German people totaling about 58,000. Where these were provocations. These were designed to frighten the German people, to galvanize the Nazi party, to help them. They did exactly the same thing. Like, I'll give you an example of the false flag they had, where they burnt the Reichstag building, the parliament down, much like you had the 9/11 thing. You had a load of new laws come in following that, much like the Patriot Act, in America. So what happened was there was the massacre of Bloomberg, and this was where 5,000 people in a small town were murdered, women were raped, children were absolutely terrible. And of course, there was an awful lot of media. It was in the newspapers and things like that in Germany, and that really got the people going. That they had to protect the Germans where they were, and this is why Hitler was moving into the various countries. Because before he went to Poland, he went to the Sudetenland, which is in Croatia. Czechoslovakia, sorry. And because basically the Germans are in lots of different places. The German-speaking peoples were over a vast region within Germany, within Europe, should I say. You've got Switzerland, you had right down to Croatia, actually, Romania, northern Italy, you had Hungary, Austria. There's various nations or groups that were German ethnic people. And so he went into Czech, and that's his Sudetenland. That caused a big rift. And then, of course, after all these massacres, total 58,000 people were murdered. They then went to Poland. And that was, of course, the beginning of the Second World War, because Britain had made a treaty that if, when Poland gets invaded, they would come to their help. Interestingly, you've got someone quite famous, I think he's H.G. Wells, was writing in 1933 that the next major war would be started because Germany invaded Poland.
Okay,
and
yeah.
You kind of have to think that all these things are planned in ahead. And then when you go back to the Freemasons and you read about Albert Pike, the supposed leader of Freemasonry in America, he wrote about the 3 world wars, and the third one being in the Middle East now.
Which is technically happening. I mean, it started. I mean, I'm sure you were following what was going on with Israel and Palestine, and now with all this commotion regarding ISIS or ISIL or whatever, and all these various
Israeli secret intelligence service.
Yeah, exactly. Who, when you track all that and you realize the history of how these different radicalized militant groups are funded and started and set up, just in the same way you were mentioning how the Jewish leaders were setting up their own people to fail and selling them down the river. The same thing has happened in the Islamic world, and a lot of these groups were spawned right from intelligence agencies coming out of the West, so as well as Mossad and everything else. So they do create the enemy so that they have the excuse to go in there and change the order and the structure, and basically it's all about resource control and domination at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, well, I think that they want this new world order, which, when I look at Agenda 21 and what that means, and I look at the various sub-programs, like it's easy to work out what they're planning to do within Europe, which, of course, Agenda 21 is global, and it's also called Sustainable Development. There's so much information about this that people probably are not looking because, they're not motivated to look. But we really need everyone to start researching this for themselves, finding the information. And basically, this is like the globalization. I mean, the reason that I really became full-time researcher and activist was because of chemtrails and the geoengineering, which leads you to climate change, which leads you to, well, Q Bono, what are they after, what do they want? And it's a massive political agenda, and it goes to Agenda 21. And basically this is the one global threat that they believe that they can get the people of the world to embrace. So through the fear of climate change, well, actually, Mikhail Gorbachev said that the fear of climate change would become the disaster key to unlock the New World Order.
It's so funny they actually say these things. There's so many sources on them. And I mean, Agenda 21, I guess it's referring to the agenda of the 21st century. This is, exactly, of course, a UN think tank or document that it was giving the preliminary ideas of what exactly they're going to do to bring this through and to basically bring control and centralization in, and it's got everything to do with how agriculture is going to unfold in the future and the restrictions on that, and land, and where people are going to live, and the restrictions that are going to be put on the people to accessing the land. It's basically a script for total industrial and social and every way you can imagine control. And a lot of people that try to say, oh, it's just a bunch of paranoid conspiracy theory. The funny thing is, it's actually happening.
Yeah, no, and it's happening very quickly. I was saying, in Europe, it's easier to find out what's going on because you can just, everything's online, everything's accessible, everything's open source material. I mean, no doubt they've got their secrets as well, but everything that really matters to educate people is available open source. So, for example, with sustainable development, if people have a look at a program called Horizon 2020, right? This is from the EU. It's funded by billions, and it's linked directly to sustainable development. Sustainable development is the new branded name. Like with global warming stopped in 1997, so they changed it to climate change. You know, because you can't deny climate change, but you can deny global warming when you're not that warm. So what they did was Agenda 21. It sounded a little bit too grim. This is back in 1992, although I found roots of it going back to 72. Basically, they changed it to sustainable development. So sustainable development sounds a bit more friendly. It sounds like you're trying to save the planet. And of course, this has been the whole drive because the foundations started to set up the green agenda. The whole green movement, most of the people in the green movement are unaware that they're being used just like everyone else does, you know, that they do. So most of them are good, coming from the heart people that come across as totally genuine, really believe it, except for some of the core people, of course, who are aware of the bigger agenda. But basically, Horizon 2020 is something, in a way, I like listening to some of the older talks by people like Aldous Huxley. He did a great speech that everyone should listen to in 1962 at Berkeley, the University of California. And it's about mass mind control. And during that speech, he talks about a scientific dictatorship happening because of all the technology back in 62. Now, Horizon 2020 is that scientific dictatorship. What it is a massive EU-funded program. I mean, I'm talking to the tune of many billions. And what they're doing is they're saying it's about innovation and how innovation and new technology will provide new jobs, which is ironic because every time we've had new technology, it's always taken away jobs. But basically, this program, Horizon 2020, has got subdivisions within that. And like one that catches my attention is called the Human Brain Project. And this is funded to over more than billions. And the Human Brain Project is about understanding how the human brain works so they can build a supercomputer based on the brain because they want everything to be connected. They need a supercomputer for their total monitoring of society and the way society will change. They have something called the Internet of Things, where everything is going to be connected via the internet. Then they have something called the singularity, where basically humanity or biodiversity, this is literally in their documents, that there will be a convergence of emerging sciences such as nanotechnology, bioscience, neuroscience, and information communication technology, in brackets ICT, to merge with biodiversity. Wow. That means they want this technology in life itself. Whether or not it's a smart plant, they talk about smart plants. Now, when anyone hears the word smart, whether it's smart cities, which you'll read about if you look into Agenda 21, or even your smartphone, or like the example I was using, smart plants.
They have smart televisions as well, and all the new gaming consoles are all completely interactive and smart devices, right? Yeah.
And SMART stands for self-monitoring, analyzing, and reporting technology. So everything with SMART that gets labeled SMART is about analyzing the situation of the user or whatever the situation is and reporting it back. So they need these supercomputers, and which they plan to have. There's new technology they talk about all the time with like incredible speeds of the processors now. That's like Star Trek stuff, and they basically are wanting to have this technology inside our brains. They actually talk about implants. They call it human enhancement. And of course, that would get linked to something called transhumanism.
This is the whole Ray Kurzweil thing, where they had a few documentaries, and there's even been that new movie with Johnny Depp, Transcendence, where they've been toying publicly and unapologetically about these kinds of ideas. Yeah,
transhumanism was first mentioned in 1957 by Aldous Huxley's brother, Julian Huxley. And they are part of the New World Order. They basically have talked for a long time. Going back to the Age of Enlightenment, how they would change the structure of society and use science to have absolute control. Whereas you see in the past, dictatorships have always failed because ultimately the human spirit rises to the occasion and fights being controlled. That's why we have rebellions and revolutions.
Yeah.
But what they plan to do is through various systems, through mass medication, through chemical systems, through systems like electromagnetic frequencies, through implants, they plan to stimulate and alter our behaviour, and through hypnosis and neuro-linguistic programming and various psychological methods to mass mind control the people. But what it really boils down to is once they can start altering us, like with mass medication, you've got your fluoride, you've got your aspartame, you've got the bisphenol A, you've got all these different chemicals that are either making us infertile, they're doing something to our brain, we're getting neurodegenerative diseases. We've got a massive increase in Alzheimer's and multiple sclerosis and Parkinson's, and children now born with, not born, but they develop autism much more, like 1 in 10,000 in 1970 to 1 in 500, or maybe even less. I'm not sure about the exact statistics. People should find this out for themselves. Go and find out the increases.
But it's definitely a drastic increase, and there's many different. It's not even full blown autism all the time. It's also these little, elements of that spectrum, full spectrum disorder in some way or another. We're seeing it in the kids, the attention spans, the lack of interest, childhood depression, all these different things that are coming out now as a result of this constant assault on our bodies, really.
Absolutely. I mean, they've talked about this in the past. You've got people like Lord Bertrand Russell. He said that in the near future there will be two types of people in society. Those, the oligarchy, will be intact as human beings, and the majority, the masses, will be altered via vaccines. He actually said this back in the 50s. By vaccines, by food that they ingest, by water, by their environment, they will be physically altered so that they will become compliant to this new world order. They want to, for want of a better phrase, they want to domesticate the herd.
Yeah.
They want to change us. They want to physically actually alter us so that we won't rebel anymore. So that, so they can become our betters, because they're not our betters at the moment. They're just equal to us. They're just more psychopathic and, possibly, I think, actually likely to be really insane. You know, these people that want this new world order, where this small group, this dominant minority at the top have control over the whole world. That's like some kind of synopsis from a movie.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of people, when we're talking here, if you're not educated on these subjects, you're going to think that you're listening to a script from a science fiction film. But you got to remember that even Hollywood, on so many occasions, going all the way back, long history there of blowing the whistle on this. And even though it comes across in some form of entertainment, it's not science fiction at all. It's actually thoroughly documented. And I just say, look to what's happening and what they're actually doing as all of the evidence that you need that this is what's going on.
Absolutely. And this is one of the things I've discovered on my journey, is that you do need to rely on yourself. You know, it's very easy to, there's other people doing lots of research and sharing their information. It's very easy to fall into the habit of getting your go-to places and restricting yourself to go and visit your go-to places and get your information from them. I would actually say that's okay to do that, cherry pick what you think is right, but if something, you should verify it from other sources. You should get into the habit of becoming an investigator. You know, we need to do it. And all this information that I've been talking about and that you've been talking about, this information is out there. It's not speculation. It's not conjecture. This is a real agenda. And so far, everything we've talked about is out in the public domain.
And would you say, Max, that, I mean, to people that are like, well, looking into all this stuff is really going to depress me and I'm going to freak out and it's just not going to do me any service anyways, you know, what can one person do? What would you say to that idea when you're talking to people? How does that conversation go, where you just see people wanting to turn away because, you know, it's scary, it's freaky what we're talking about here? How do we combat that while at the same time being aware of what we have to be aware of?
Well, I would say that when I first started to have sufficient information, you know, have a big enough view of the picture that I was willing to try and reach people, I did realise I could overwhelm people quite quickly. Yeah. And, you know, obviously you see people going through it. I mean, on my own personal journey, what I found was I went through various different emotions like, you know, disbelief, anger, depression, almost like a sense of bereavement, really. But, I mean, I was lucky. Various different things happened in my life, so my awakening has been quite a long process. What we're talking about is people waking up suddenly. And it is overwhelming. But the thing is, the more information you can equip yourself with, the less disbelief you have, you know, so you can understand that it's real. You need to kind of have a perspective of how it's developed and what's really going on and where it's heading to. So you kind of do need to do a bit of education. You do have to rely on yourself and do that for yourself. And then you have to kind of realise, well, how could we possibly defeat this system that's been in place or been developed for hundreds of years? And I kind of realised that this whole system is working, as it has done for many years, on deception. It works by a mass deception. Basically, it's a bit like Wizard of Oz. You pull back the curtain and you realise what's going on, and their power disappears because you have a different perspective on what's really going on. And I think that's very empowering. I think that can help people quite a lot because at least it puts you in the right position. You know how you know where you are then, and then you can figure out how you can move forward. And I mean, I wish I had all the answers, and I you know, I do contemplate that, but I don't have all the answers. I would say education, self-education is the most important. Then raising awareness, and what I found in my own personal experience is confronting the establishment themselves by. It's kind of they can't lie to you anymore when you know the truth. You know, I've had politicians literally run away from me. They don't want to talk because they know they're in trouble because you've learned what the truth is. And the thing is, the truth is like you know, they say the truth will set you free, and that knowledge is power. I really believe that those are good sayings because it seems to be apparent that that's the reality.
I would agree.
So
Yeah.
basically, the more and more people that learn what's really going on and try to understand, recognize what is disinformation and misinformation, and that can only come through your own personal experiences, by learning to recognize what is disinformation, what is misinformation, because there's lots of different storylines out there. There's lots of invented agendas, and some of these agendas might even be decades and decades old. So there's an awful lot of people that really believe in some things, like, for example, I don't go along with the alien agenda. I don't buy that at all, simply because I think that our technology, I understand that if we look to the past, you can look to something called the Vedic texts in ancient India, and there they talk about flying machines, and they talk about ray guns, and they talk about nuclear explosions, and there's all sorts of things. So the elites and who have far better education than we do, they've been privy to this stuff for hundreds and hundreds of years, and they've been working towards how they could control society and how they would invent things. And then you have to learn about predictive programming and realise that we've been given an awful lot of deception in order to prepare us so that we'd be susceptible to this new world order situation. So if you can recognise that, you can peel away all the layers of the onion. And it is a process, but you can do it. And basically, I think when you arrive at that situation, it's very freeing and liberating, and it puts you in a better position to then go and wake as many people up as possible, whether it's giving presentations or whether it's just writing letters to the establishment or phoning people in the establishment up, with whatever area that concerns you. It might be fracking, might be illegal wars, it might be austerity measures or some banking frauds, or learning about the legal system or the political systems, challenging the politicians on various positions they hold, which are really staged because they're being pressured by lobby groups to do it. Confront these people and let them know that basically the people are waking up. And we know the deceptions. Talk about false flags, talk about 9/11, talk about World Trade Center 7 that collapsed at free fall speed. You've got demolition experts from Holland like Danny Joenko who publicly talked about there is no way that fell due to fire. That had to be a controlled demolition. He's even talked about it on Dutch television in detail how it was done. There's no question. And all these governments around our world would know. At various levels, architects, whatever, they would know that was an inside job.
Yeah, yeah.
And, the fact that none of our governments are even questioning it. There's no real investigation or even discussion. There's no discussion anymore. I am a builder, as I said, and I've worked on a lot of building sites, all kinds. And I know how big buildings go up, and they're pretty strong and they're pretty safe. And in fact, the World Trade Center 7 Twin Towers were designed specifically to take an impact from a Boeing 707, which was the biggest plane at its time when they were built. So the design of those towers was specific, that they should withstand a collision with an airplane. And to have these buildings made out of steel frame structures that up until that date had never collapsed due to fire, and have 3 of them collapse at free fall speed, and no one's even discussing that at the government levels. It's all just been established what it is. Very low budget investigation from the Americans. It was impeded. They shipped out all the steel to China immediately, which is even a crime in America. You're not allowed to remove the evidence from a crime scene.
And there wouldn't have even been an investigation had the families not pushed for that originally. And then the investigation that they got, of course, as you said, it was just a complete farce. It was totally set up to fail. And this is so important. And I think people listening, they need to realize how important something like 9/11 and the truth behind what really happened coming out, how important that is, because this, of course, is the event that has launched us into this war on terror, which is we're still apparently fighting now, and there's been so many repercussions from this, as well as a continual decline in them taking away more of our privileges as serfs, so to speak. They keep dwindling them down, using this event and of other events like it as the means of doing that. So this is something that I know it happened a long time ago, but it's been exposed as being the information we were given as being completely fraudulent, and misinformation and disinformation out there about it. So it's important we correct that. And I agree with you, Max, that if we can gain the knowledge and arm ourselves with as much information as we can and investigate these things and question authority and do this research ourselves, at least we're not in ignorance anymore. And I think that's the main culprit when you're talking about somebody who's living in fear. They often accuse people talking about this as just propagating fear, but it's not true. We're just talking about the information that will set us free from believing a lie. And I think it's the ignorance itself that is the source of the fear. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I really do believe everything has always succeeded for the New World Order so far because of a mass deception. So if you can remove that deception, it changes. It's a game changer. It's a total game changer. That's why so many people waking up is a threat to them. They are aware. I really believe that in America, obviously they introduced the Patriot Act, which was written before 9/11, which they say was in response.
That's right.
I believe that the Department of Homeland Security, which is basically a domestic military force, which has been built up steadily because the New World Order puppeteers who control the various governments around the world, they're aware that in America they've got a problem because they're all armed. And, of course, they use the 9/11 false flag to move forward with the agenda for the American Century or whatever. I don't remember the exact
Project for the American Century, I think is.
That's it. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And but basically, I think they've always been aware that eventually enough people will question what's going on because it was an obvious inside job. But because we constantly get repeated, although less now, but we've been constantly repeated that it was a terrorist event. It was whatever. We must kill Muslims and basically, it's they've always known that people are going to figure out what happened because it's impossible what happened. And there wasn't even an aeroplane at the Pentagon. There wasn't even an aeroplane at Pennsylvania. You have a look at any aeroplane crash, and there's always the engines. There's always big tail sections, or the fuselage is broken up. Even if whatever type of crash it is, there's plenty of evidence. You can't just have a load of people from the Pentagon do a little a field strip search of the land outside and pick up tiny pieces and clear the area within a day. It's ridiculous. It can't happen. You can't have a plane vaporized like in Pennsylvania. You can't also. Here's a good one. This is a fact as well. On 9/11, there was a drill running. FEMA arrived the day before for the drill of the Twin Towers being attacked by aeroplanes. Right? Now, in London, when they had the 7/7 bombings, exactly the same, there was a drill running with 2,000 emergency staff at the exact locations, the exact tube stations and the bus stops where everything, the incidents happened. There were people ready for a drill to run through what would happen if there was a terrorist event, and it turned out there was a terrorist event.
Oh, but it must have just been a coincidence, Max. I mean, it must have been a coincidence.
It's incredible, isn't it? Like two major events that brought out lots of new laws and ramped up the fear factor happened to have drills running for the exact things that supposedly actually happened on those days. That's just incredible. But, I think that the American people will wake up to this. And I kind of look to the American people as a ray of hope, because they had their War of Independence. And I know that actually now historically it looks like King George was funding both sides, and he ended up with some deal. Even though the Britain lost it, they carried on getting repayments, and ultimately you've got the Federal Reserve, and that is a system of funneling money back to the British monarchy. But the American people themselves, I think they will help us, and they've got their guns, which is really, really important. But they've had this terrible deed done to them. They've had massive changes, and obviously the New World Order are really concerned about the fact that America is a weak link. And been involved with so many false flags. People know about the Vietnam War. People know about things like USS Liberty. People are waking up to this, and it's a big, major problem for them. And I guess it's not just America that's going to save us. Obviously, it's everyone, everywhere.
But it's true, though. It's true, though, Max, that, America is a key here. And, living in Canada, I consider myself part of that because we've pretty much just been completely amalgamated into becoming
that's
like
right.
a 51st.
The American Union.
Yeah, exactly, right? It's all the same. But ultimately, that was, in modern history, or I guess in history in general, the closest that people have gotten to having any kind of beacon of freedom, and they knew that in order to bring about a new world order structure, they need to take down that entire idea and take down anybody that would continue to spread those kinds of ideas. So America, kind of, even though it's been an illusion that they've been living in a free country and having all of these freedoms, they are quickly waking up to the fact that even the little freedoms they were given are being taken away as well now. And it's just becoming blatantly obvious. Everybody I speak to from the States, they're like, hey, can I move to Canada? Because things are getting crazy over here. And I'm like, well, I know we're probably about 4 or 5 years behind you guys, but it's starting to go that way here as well. So I do see that there is much more interest in this. People are really onto it. A lot of people can at least get their heads around the banking system and what took place with the whole thing in 2008, and how it was clear that this is just a cleanup job so that they can continue to centralize control in the markets and all this. Many people in America have realized that they've been robbed blind completely by these international banks. And then you start to realize, oh my God, my tax money is going towards wars, and these wars are predicated on these events and all this propaganda coming out from these politicians and the media, and people I think it's easier now for people to put two and two together, I would say.
Absolutely. I think that it's a strange thing, isn't it? Like we were saying before about people waking up, what would we say to them? It's overwhelming, it's bewildering, they have all these problems. But also at the same time, we are now at the stage where we can share information and we can find information at such a pace. It's the double-edged sword. They invented the internet to try and entrain us and to change society, but it's also opened up information and communication.
Yeah.
And that will be their undoing if it hasn't already been their undoing. You've got people like Zbigniew Brzezinski talking about how the people are awakening to what's happening in the world, and they have access to information like they've never had before, and they're not going to take it. He's obviously a key New World Order protagonist, and they're aware. You've got people like Hillary Clinton saying we are losing the information war.
Yeah.
And they're desperate to bring out new ways to try and lock down the internet and to try and censor people.
And here in Canada, we even have the Harper administration here admitting that they're putting out these different agents online to help correct propaganda or correct public opinion, meaning we're talking internet shills. These guys are paid. A lot of them aren't even human. They're probably just programs or whatnot that are programmed to say certain things on forums and to cause all kinds of disinformation. Max, I know you've had your fair share of battling, especially regards to the geoengineering situation with these websites like Contrail Science and Metabunk and all these other things. What's your take on that whole disinformation campaign and the deliberate nature behind it that's taking place online?
Well, the way I kind of look at it, I looked at what might bring down the New World Order. Obviously, I think 9/11 is a real weakness for them. People waking up to austerity and the banking issues and everything else. But with chemtrails, I've worked outside all my life, and I was working weather dependent. So I would be watching the skies all the time. And basically, all of a sudden, we started seeing all these white lines in the sky, and we started seeing new types of clouds, and started saying, hang on a second, something is changing, and it's not climate change, something is going on. And I think that it's an issue where there's so much propaganda to try and disguise what's happening. And if people can realise that's what it is, then they can quickly wake up to it. And people are waking up to it. It's absolutely incredible. I've been doing this full-time for 3 years now, and I've painted up my van. I've got a big panel van, and I've painted it all up with different things about chemtrails and what's going on with the New World Order. And it's now gets to the stage where I live in a country, and I might drive wherever I drive. I get hoots, waves, and everything else, which is really, really encouraging. I mean, I've recently went to Berlin for a climate engineering conference. So many times people were shaking my hands, waving, wanting to take photographs of us, driving along, taking photographs. People are waking up en masse. And I find that really, really encouraging. So I see groups like Metabunk and Contrail Science being put in place, maybe. I mean, I don't know if they're really put in place, but it seems like they are. Yeah. And you hear of people like, who is it? Edward Snowden. Now, I don't know about Edward Snowden, if he's genuine. I'm starting to feel he's actually been put out there because it's another method of getting information into the public domain. Maybe some of the things he says are true, and some of the things he's saying are what the people want it true, but the New World Order want people to think is true. But basically, something of interest, but it was already out in the domain anyway, was about GCHQ and the NSA working together collaboratively to monitor all internet activity. And one of the things that the GCHQ were doing was setting up a system where they would create something called sock puppets. And these are the online shills and trolls that would create disinformation, distract people, upset people. If they can wind you up and get you responding to something, and they might keep you going for hours if you'll let them.
Yeah. I've had my run-ins with some of these people. They just have nothing better to do, and they're 10 steps ahead of you. They're setting little traps to try to get you to go into it. It's pretty interesting, actually.
Yeah, well, they're ready. Well, they're ready, you see, because they've already got the arguments all worked out. They've already been through this. When you go on Contrail Science, for example, which has been running for over 8 years now, he's got how to debunk chemtrailers, and he's actually put the resources there. So if you've got a troll wannabe who's a real skeptic or something, he can go onto the site and find a whole list of questions and a whole list of information that's been put there specifically to help a skeptic go to town on chemtrail activists, which I think is highly irresponsible, because a lot of the information that Mick West uses is actually inaccurate. It's actually wrong. Like, for example, he shows lots of pictures from World War II of planes with contrails, trying to indicate that contrails have always been around and all we're seeing is contrails. But in actual fact, I've done my own research on this, and what I've found out is that all those pictures of any of the planes from the Second World War with contrails are planes that were using water methanol injection, or also known as anti-detonation injection. And what this was, you would have planes with tanks of water and methanol that would be injected into the engines to cool the piston head so they could get a bit more power, so that in a dogfight or on a bombing run where they want to be as fast as possible, they would engage this war power and they would get up to 15% extra speed. But the consequence was you would get a thick white trail, because obviously you've got steam from the water at high temperatures, but also the methanol, which is an alcohol, when it's mixed with water, that is actually what they use for stage fog generation. So when they also use dry ice, CO2 as well, but they do use alcohol with water heated, and it's only a very small amount, and you get loads, and you basically get a cloud and they use this in the movie sets. So they were using this to get this extra power in World War II, and the consequence was a thick white trail, which they're calling a contrail. And Mick West says, oh, that's just normal planes. That's what they did because they were at altitude and it was extremely cold and whatever, you know. And that is completely a misrepresentation of the facts, or, you know. And I've already tackled him on this, and he's still got it on there. So he's intentionally. I pointed him in the right direction so that he could find out that it's an actual fact. He's not interested in the truth. If he was, he would retract that information and remove it from his website because it's completely wrong.
And there's many cases with someone like Mick West and some of these other people. I mean, I remember watching that television special that was done by Joe Rogan, and it was called Joe Rogan Questions Everything. I'm sure you've seen it. They had the chemtrail debate on there, and I think they had what was it, Kristen? I can't remember the female that came out.
Kristen Megan.
Yes, that's right. They
and
had her,
Scott Stevens.
they had a few others, and clearly the way the questioning was done, the way the thing was shot. It was just interesting to see that anybody that was speaking about information regarding this being geoengineering or chemtrails, they were always, you know, just edited to be looking insane, and they didn't have their entire. I've listened to all of these people. I've interviewed some of them, and I know what their whole line of evidence is, and it wasn't presented on the show. And yet, when Mick West comes on, he's treated as the expert. He's treated as the scientist and the serious thinker. And it was just, I realized. I started questioning what was going on with Joe Rogan there. And I don't know if it's him personally or whether it's just the network or a combination of both. But either way, if you're going to say that you're going to put out a fair argument or a fair debate, then you've got to hear out both sides fully and look at the entire body of evidence. It was just ridiculous.
I agree. I mean, I myself, I was on a Swedish mainstream television program. It was addressing the conspiracies, and obviously the topic was chemtrails. And I met them in London, and we had an interview for over 3 hours walking through London Market, and we covered a lot of information. You know, I was able to talk about the fact that JFK talked about controlling the weather in 1961 when he addressed the United Nations on the 25th September in 1961. You know, saying that all nations will work together to accurately predict and eventually control the weather in 61. I mentioned, you know, these are legitimate facts. I've been to I've not been to the archives. I've visited the archives online, the JFK archives, and it's there. You know, people can find this out. It's true. And I mentioned these facts, and when it came to the edited version of the program, I was lucky I didn't come off too badly, but, you know, it was completely orchestrated to make it look like it's some kind of wacky conspiracy theory, and people are crazy, basically. That's what they would love us to think, that you're a conspiracy theorist.
You got to put a label on it, and then people just don't want to be associated with a negative label, and instantly you've got censorship. It's amazing.
It's very powerful, I must admit, and I still see it now. With my van painted up, I mean, I made a big commitment. Like, there's not one side of the van that's not painted, and even the bonnet on the front has got a reverse sign. So when I'm driving behind someone, they see it in their mirror.
Wow.
It's. I've lost work because I've been recommended for work. I've turned up and they've seen the van and they've said to me, literally, "I'm sorry, this isn't going to work," because they've got this instant image.
Yeah.
That you're a conspiracy theorist and you must be a crackpot, you know. But I think that we just have to weather the storm and continue, because what I found, I mean, I've confronted people like Professor David Keith, and I caught him in the line. I've asked many of these scientists pertinent questions. And believe me, their face goes white and they are shifty. They know they're in trouble. And when I was at the Berlin conference, it was on for 4 days. It was a very good experience. It was a wonderful experience, actually. I did manage to get to present, which was an ad hoc presentation in front of Ken Caldera and a number of other scientists. And basically, this conference, the Berlin Climate Engineering Conference, was there was a transdisciplinary conference with people from different parts of. They might be engineers, they might be lawyers, climate scientists, and they were all there to listen to various different presentations and discussions and activities. And over the 4-day period, the idea was at the end of the 4-day period, you would have received your information update, and they wanted everyone that attended to sign something called the Berlin Declaration. And this was an agreement that it was required that we should move forward with the next stage of climate action, which would be the experimentation of the techniques to be used for climate engineering. And we asked so many different pertinent questions that when it came to the end, the Berlin Declaration was scrapped.
Wow, that's good to hear.
Yeah, so many people, they listened to us. I mean, I even managed to get into a panel discussion, and I was sitting next to Alan Roebuck, and I've got a recording of the whole panel discussion, and he just sounds like an idiot in the end, you know, just total denial. And my questions were pertinent, they were to the point, and, you know, he's just in total denial. And it comes across that way as well. You know, and there were several people watching this panel discussion, and when I say, you know, there was at least, I don't know, 80 or 100 people there. I mean, there was different talks and panels going on all the time, that could be 5 at any one time. But basically, what we demonstrated, there was myself and 4 other activists that met. I mean, two were from England, 1 was from Ireland, 1 was from Austria, and 1 was from Spain. So I think actually that's 5, and myself. And we agreed to work with each other once we realised we were all there in opposition, and it was really, really empowering. And I recognised that we can actually meet these people eye to eye, have discussions with them, share our information, our research, and we can get them. We can get them on the back foot, because the whole climate thing is a fraud. Yeah. And if you do enough research, you can expose it. You know, and obviously they are doing some form of overt geoengineering. This is what the chemtrail thing is about.
And why do you think they're doing that? They're, in one sense, they're just proposing this in the public arena. They're just talking about it, like David Keith and all these guys. But then we see the evidence of exactly what they're talking about actually happening, and happening for quite some time now. Is it their goal to just, you know, roll it out incrementally and then just admit to it one day and go, hey, you know what? Here's why, but we've been doing this for a long time. You think they're going to come clean with it? Or do you think there's something else going on with why that is? Maybe these guys genuinely aren't aware that this is really actually going on. You know, it's just really interesting.
Well, when I talked about Edward Snowden earlier, there was supposedly some tweeting going on, which could be anyone anyway, and he's saying that, yeah, chemtrails are real and they're doing it to mitigate global warming. Okay, now some lead researchers and activists will say that geoengineering was done to mitigate global warming, but it's gone wrong. Mm-hmm. And it's exacerbating all the problems, and actually it's gone the other way and it's made everything much, much worse. I don't believe that at all. I think that from my research about the historical desire for weather and climate modification, it literally goes back, the first scientific reference I can find to it is back in 1722 at the Bavarian Academy of Sciences, when they offered a prize for the best methods to control the weather. And the story goes on from there onwards. You know, we can go back to 1945 when they described Vladimir Zworykin was talking with a guy called Newman, and they were corresponding about how they a proposal to control weather and climate. In 1945, we were talking about directing energy in different locations and changing the properties of the surface, of the atmosphere, and of the oceans to become more absorbing or scattering or reflecting. So we're looking at the basis of a program they're putting in place now. And I think that basically the covert climate forcing now is to create the symptoms that they're saying is anthropogenic global warming. What I'm trying to say is they can create extremes of weather. That's very easy. Like, they were making floods back from the 40s. Literally, in 1952, there was an incident in the UK in a place called Lynmouth, 1952. The RAF and the UK Met Office and international scientists were involved in rain-making activities called Operation Cumulus. And basically, they created a terrible storm that washed this whole village that was at the bottom of a valley away overnight, killing 35 people, terrible destruction. And there was a lot of activity in the days building up to this, and people were aware the RAF were doing something. And there was a lot of talk that maybe the RAF had done something. And, of course, there was instant denials. And supposedly Operation Cumulus stopped. But it now transpires that wasn't the case. It just went underground because they realised they would have payback. When things went wrong, if it was in the public domain, then people would have the right to compensation and everything. So basically, I have a copy of interviews with the flight crew, referring to their logbooks, describing the mission. And they called Operation Cumulus Operation Witch Doctor because they were making rain. Wow. So that's 1952, and I've got very decent, hardcore evidence that was a rain-making exercise. So they were able to make storms and floods back in 1952. And, we've got Project Popeye in the 60s, where, interestingly enough, I've got documentation that states the CIA were operating out of Thailand in 1963 prior to Operation Popeye, doing experimental weather warfare in North Vietnam in 1963. Mm-hmm. And then Project Popeye didn't start until years, I think it was, I'm not sure the year actually, I think it was 65, but it was after 63. And, with Project Popeye, they actually flew 2,500 missions, and there were only about 6 planes in their squadron. But basically, they were very successful, sometimes extending the monsoon season up until 60 days, an extra 2 months long, flooding out the Ho Chi Minh Trail. They had no asphalt roads, so everything was actually covered in mud, and the idea was to hamper the logistical supplies. So that was very, very successful. And if it was not for a senator in the US called Claiborne Pell, this wouldn't have come to light. There were congressional hearings, and there was nothing but denials. But this Senator Claiborne Pell, he did so much digging around, and he basically found out that it was weather warfare and realised that this could be used. This could be an escalation, like the Cold War with the nuclear arms race. He realised this could be terrible. So through his efforts, he had something called the ENMOD Treaty, the Environmental Treaty, which was to stop using weather warfare as a weapon of war. So there's a treaty that many nations have signed. I can't remember how many. I think it's at least 28 nations, the big ones, agreeing that they would not use weather warfare. So for people waking up to the idea of chemtrails and being able to control the weather and everything, most people think, you can't control the weather, that's ridiculous, you can't do it. But in actual fact, it's been, I think, they were first doing cloud seeding before the Second World War in the 30s. They were doing it in Holland. And then, of course, in 1947, there's quite a public one called Project Cirrus, where General Electric were running a long-term rain-making exercise where they were seeding CO2, later silver iodide, and then following that urea and various other things. I mean, I found references to hundreds of ingredients they use for cloud seeding. It's very well researched. There have been over 100 nations developing weather modification over 70 years. So
Wow, it's just incredible. Like to think about the history of this and to see how much this has been. Like you said, there's documentation, there's discussions about this, and then there's evidence of it, and then you get into the fact that there's been people documenting this currently all over the world. There's been tons of documentaries made about it. There's conferences and activist groups. There's pilots that have come forward. There's military people that have come forward. There's so much information out there for people to look at. For someone to just stare at you and say, no, it's just a figment of your imagination. There's no debate. It's just contrails. Don't worry about it. Go back to sleep. That's just not good enough. The evidence is there, and there should be a massive amount of public attention on this issue. I totally agree, because of the fact that we are seeing just drastic changes in the weather that are just not making any more sense, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. And they're just trying to write it off as, it's just man-made global warming, or whatever their excuse is, which then allows them to bring in more legislation, taxes, etc. Right?
Well, yeah, exactly right. I mean, this is the thing is, when anyone's investigating these things, they've got to think of cui bono, who benefits. And basically, there are, like, for example, 500 new climate laws for 2015. And we're in 66 nations around the world, including Canada, US, Russia, China, India, Brazil, all the big countries, Australia, Britain, Europe, you name it. And so that's a major indication that the whole climate thing is a political agenda. Then you've got the carbon taxes, cap and trade schemes. You've got the end of 2015 in Paris in December, there's going to be a UN climate conference. At this conference, they plan to have ironed out and announced to the public a UN climate treaty. And of course, this will herald big changes. You're going to see an awful lot more of these corporate-funded demonstrations like we've seen recently, with people like Leonardo DiCaprio speaking at the United Nations, saying the climate's in trouble, we must take climate action, which is a hoax, really, because it seems like one of the things from that earlier reference I said about 1945, there's another guy called Harry Wexler, who's a key meteorological person. He died in 1960. In the mid-60s, but basically he's another key author of how to do this weather modification. He talked about using chemicals to destroy the ozone layer in strategic locations in order to increase the heat as a weapon. Now, if we look at in the Northern Hemisphere, we know that there was a hole over the Southern Hemisphere trying to melt the Antarctic, it looks like, which incidentally the Antarctic has got now record levels of sea ice. There's never been as much sea ice since records have been monitoring it. So global warming is not happening down there. There's the fundamental things about ice. There's air temperature, the temperature of the sea. An iceberg can actually never be deeper than 10 meters below the surface level. It's usually 6 to 10 meters. 10 meters maximum, that's it. Because the sea temperatures are quite constant. Only the very surface levels will change quite a bit. So global warming is the fear factor they want everyone to believe. The chemtrail, or the covert climate engineering program, because it's multifaceted, there's different elements to it, there's different technologies being used in different ways. This is I don't know if it's intergovernmental, I suppose it has to be. It's like NATO, it's the military-industrial complex. We're looking at them destroying the ozone layer in strategic locations. There are areas of America where the ozone's been damaged, over Europe, over England, and obviously over the Antarctic, because they're desperate to melt the Arctic. And that was talked about quite openly up until the mid-60s. That they were working towards it. The National Science Foundation, I've read recommendations on how to melt the Arctic in 1965.
Wow.
So the idea. See, the thing is, what they want with the Arctic is there's vast tracts of land which is virtually inhabitable because it's too cold. You've got a very critical shipping lane, so they're not left having to depend on the Panama Canal or have to go all the way down the bottom to circumnavigate the world. They really, really desperately want to open up the Arctic shipping route. Also, there are vast reserves of oil and gas and various other resources they're just waiting to exploit and plunder. And, the Russians have been working with the US and the UK since the 70s on weather modification, on methods to melt the Arctic. Even going further back, Julian Huxley, I mentioned him earlier, he was the guy who talked about transhumanism. He actually put forward, he was a member of UNESCO, but I don't know how, but he put forward a proposal to melt the Arctic by a series of nuclear detonations. Now, the thing is about nuclear detonations, many people don't realise there have been 2,050 nuclear detonations on our planet.
Oh, yeah, these guys are insane. This is just ridiculous.
But this 28,000 times the power of the nuclear bombs or hydrogen bombs in Japan. 28,000 times. Now, who gave those people the right to do that to our planet? That's insane. That's truly insane. If anyone doesn't really quite gather yet that the people running our planet, the oligarchy, are insane, just consider 2,050 nuclear detonations. Some of those in the upper atmosphere, like Operation Argos, Starfish Prime, Hardtack. This was detonating nuclear explosions up to 350 miles from the surface of the Earth in the atmosphere, in the upper atmosphere, to disperse radioactive particles to create an electron shield around the planet, which they want to use with experimentation. They said for communication, but I think it's quite clear we're talking about weather modification here. It's learning to control the ionosphere. You've got people like Lyndon Johnson, who in 1958 stated about the space race, the coming space race, that whoever controls space controls the weather. Which is interesting because I do have to wonder, has all the activity in space, it's been weaponizing space to put up satellites that can interact. So obviously with satellites you can monitor weather in ways they couldn't do before. Which might help them with weather modification. Because, like, for example, you've got Project Storm Fury, which ran for 20 years, only stopped in 1979, which was learning how to steer hurricanes. Now, if you've got satellites out in space, you can see a build-up of a hurricane, then maybe you can decide to steer it or direct it using the methods they developed during Project Storm Fury. That's one way, of course. Another way is maybe they've got some microwave technology or electromagnetic frequency technologies to interact with our atmosphere, because basically our atmosphere is a huge energy shield that's surrounding us, and what they want to do is they've admitted that they now know how to control the ionosphere. There was a recent congressional meeting about shutting down HAARP in Alaska.
Oh, yes,
and at this meeting, they specifically that they were addressing some Navy scientists, and he said that their experiments to control the ionosphere have been completed.
And is this why we're even talking about shutting down the HAARP facility?
Well, I think they're upgrading it, really.
Upgrading it, that's what I thought, yeah.
Yeah, technology changes. Like, for example, there are many ionospheric heaters, which are these antenna fields where they can direct all the energy. I mean, so there's many different antennas all acting as one. These ionospheric heaters are all around the planet. There's loads of them. Even like there's one in the Antarctica run by South Africa. They've even got one. There's more than one in Russia. There's several. Suri is one place. There's a big one. There used to be one operating in Ukraine called Duga 3, which was known as the woodpecker. And there's some in Puerto Rico, there's one in Peru, in Japan, in India, in China, in Australia. There's these things. The one in Norway was the one I was getting to. The one in Norway, IceCat, that's just been upgraded to a new digital 3D one. And what that means is they don't have to direct the antennas anymore. And they can, because they don't have to direct the antennas, they can do multiple experiments in milliseconds. So they can be affecting the ionosphere in different locations almost simultaneously.
And what's their justification for it? Is it just that they're testing, like when people would go back and look at HARP, they're just like, oh, we're just doing experiments and we're testing and we're just trying to develop ways to, whatever. I
understand space weather is one of the ones that makes me laugh. Because space weather, so it depends on what you define as space. It's 60 miles above the Earth's surface. So the atmosphere, depending on what layers, it goes out hundreds of miles. But obviously it's a lot weaker, and there's not the gases there, but there's still the electromagnetic effects of the ionosphere going out, stretching out. But space is 60 miles up. So basically, space weather, it's weather. Our weather. Here's the whole thing about climate change. Our weather is controlled by the sun. Right? The sun is the main driver of climate. And all the activity, the changes that happen on our planet are in perfect correlation with the activity of the sun. So the way the sun interacts is that the energy, the electromagnetic energy from the sun affects the electromagnetic activity of our planet as it does the other planets. So that's the interesting thing. When there was a period of global warming, because we do have periods of warming and cooling, the other planets in our solar system were also going through periods of warming, which was registered by NASA. So you can't say it's anthropogenic global warming.
Yeah, we're not reaching out that far to start affecting other planets in the solar system.
Well, unless you believe all that stuff about alternative space programs, and we've got colonies on other planets, but I really don't believe that. But,
I've had a number of interesting guests on my show, Max. You never know. I talk to these people all the time, and I don't know. I would just say I wouldn't put it past them, but either way, we're still in the same situation here on planet Earth.
Yeah, we have a lot. They have a lot of secrets, so you never know, do you? But ultimately, we are looking at a situation where they are trying to understand space weather and solar winds and all this.
Yeah.
And the thing is, are they trying to mimic the activity of the effects of the sun so they can control our weather? Because they understand the electromagnetic frequency from the sun does interact with our planet and does change the weather and change the climate. So this is one focus area. If we looked at patents by Bernard Eastland altering regions of the atmosphere, and he has several, and he worked for the companies that own the patents for HARP. You have to, realise that they're obviously, I know they're looking to control the climate with HARP. I mean, I've seen the documentation from the EU government from 1999, where they were expressing their doubts. Well, they wanted the US military to come and give a presentation because they knew that HARP could affect the climate and also alter human behaviour.
That's the other element of this that's really interesting. I interviewed Nick Begich last year and spoke to him about it, and he was going into the different experimentation that they've done and realizing these different frequencies and how they can actually manipulate, the frequency of the mental patterns and whatnot. So there's multiple uses for this technology, and none of them really seem to be very beneficial to the human race.
Well, actually, you'd have to wonder what really is beneficial. It's for the dominant minority, and that's it, really.
Yeah.
Getting back to the mind or altering human behaviour, mind control. When I was in the British Army in the 80s. At the end of the 80s, or mid-80s actually, I attended a lecture, and it was about Soviet technology. And in this lecture, they talked about the Duga 3 installation, which was incidentally at Chernobyl, where the nuclear accident was. And
The meltdown.
some people do speculate that maybe there was some kind of something going on between them. They were experimenting, and they created the nuclear disaster to shut down Duga 3, which they called the woodpecker. Now, this was a fact. I was at a lecture in 1986 in Germany when I was in the army, and in this lecture they said that the Duga 3 installation was sending extremely low frequencies across the UK and to America. And the frequencies were at the right frequency to affect human behaviour. So we were being told that this was being used to disrupt society and to create problems, as a weapon. And that was back in '86.
And how did that sit with you, like right off the bat? I mean, this was a long time ago. Did that kind of start a process inside of you to investigate this more, or was it just like, go along with it? Like, how did that feel at the time?
Well, I've always been aware of it, and my mind, it's never left my mind. One of the things that I did look into about mind control is I realised that they were working with electromagnetic frequencies for mind control back in the 1930s. And I think basically it's interesting that the whole thing about electromagnetic frequencies does interweave with mind control and weather control. For example, there's a guy called J.J. Thomson, who was an extremely credible physicist of his day, a member of the Royal Society, and he would go around touring to America and different places around the world, giving lectures and everything else. And in 1910, he went to a Sheffield Symposium in Sheffield conference, and he mentioned that it would only take a relatively modest amount of electricity in the atmosphere to control vast regions of weather. So I can see this development. Basically, it seems to be the understanding of electromagnetic frequencies is the key for weather control and for weather control's got many different facets to it, but certainly for mind control. So I have been aware of that. I mean, I've often wondered about the use of mobile phones, about the amount of electromagnetic frequencies we're now subjected to. Even these low energy supposed eco light bulbs.
Oh yes, these things that I think that if they break they fall and they break, you need like guys with a hazmat suit to come in and take it off.
That's absolutely true. There's a German boy who fell onto one when he was playing his whatever, and he's ended up with terrible deformities where these nanoparticles from inside have got in through the cuts, and his body's got all gangrenous, and he's lost his hair and all sorts of problems. These things are absolutely lethal. Yeah. But they get, when you switch one on, if you get an electromagnetic meter and put it nearby, as soon as you switch it on, the needle will go straight up to the top, because the amount of energy coming out of these things is just incredible at electromagnetic frequencies. So these frequencies interfere with our bodies. All our cells, everything in our body communicates via electromagnetic frequencies. So, these days we're subjected. They're really pushing the use of Wi-Fi.
Yeah,
you've got smartphones and iPads and all these things.
Smart meters.
Smart meters are terrible. They're actually very, very powerful. They repeat every few minutes. They will be designed to interact with your household appliances. They're going to try, once they get the smart meters in, they will push for everyone to move their fridges to Wi-Fi enabled, to all your electrical appliances to be Wi-Fi enabled, so they can monitor your activity, what you're doing. They're even going to have your food will have RFID tags in the packaging. So when you put it in your fridge, all the information about the product, it automatically goes back to this supercomputer. Your fridge will tell you, "Oh, hang on a minute, your ham's out of date now," or whatever. He's
making a peanut butter jelly sandwich. Somebody
Yeah.
stop her right
Oh,
now.
there'd be calorie counting.
Yeah.
There'd be calorie counting, saying, "Whoa, you won't be getting your health insurance because you've been reckless. You've been eating too many goodies." It's all of these things are in the pipeline.
Micromanagement.
Yeah, and this is the new world order, which they talked about with the Brave New World in 1932 with Aldous Huxley, and George Orwell warned us with 1984 and Big Brother. These things have been planned for a long time. If we go back to the 20s and 30s, there was a movement called the technocracy. And this is where they were going to they were going to take money, they were going to remove money. They're heading towards that with a cashless society, where they're manoeuvring us to get rid of cash and have contact cards. And eventually the idea is to have an RFID chip.
Which Regina Dugan, who was former head of DARPA, now working for Google, is openly advertising that people should wear what she's calling wearables, and how trendy it is. And it's these biostamps that are sort of the next step towards actually implantable microchips. And then she's like, it gets even better, and she's just so excited about it. I saw the video, and she's like, you can ingest these little smart pills, and it's like these little nanobots communicate with the biochip. And I'm just like, people that look at you sideways when you're talking about this, they honestly just believe you've watched too many movies like Minority Report or whatever. But you're like, no, seriously, this is what they're legitimately trying to create.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier Ray Kurzweil.
Yeah,
he also works for Google. He's an engineer for Google.
Really, I didn't know that. Wow. Yeah. So they got the top cheese up there working for Google. Right?
Yeah, Google. I mean, Google's incredible. Actually, they are invading our lives so much. I mean, the streetcar thing in the UK and in Germany, they had the Google streetcars going around with their 360 cameras. And what they were doing when they were driving around was swiping all your information off your computer. They had a method to break your Wi-Fi code, and they were just swiping all your personal details.
Really?
So they were burgling your personal data from your computer as they drove by doing a Google Street Map.
Well, but if you got nothing to hide, then you got nothing to worry about, right?
That's the big thing, isn't it? You can have total monitoring, but if you're a good person, there's no problem, is it?
Yeah, exactly. Privacy is it's so outdated now. It's all about this big collectivized fascist society, man. It's unbelievable.
They want to get inside our heads. When I was talking about the Human Brain Project earlier from Horizon 2020, which is the program to implement the scientific dictatorship, because the science is the key to stopping, all the different systems they used to control society in the past. It's always failed because the human spirit, rebelled. But with science, they want to tame that human spirit. The Human Brain Project has a part of it which is about creating an interface between the brain and technology. So they literally want to, you can think technology to do something. Basically technology can get in your brain.
And it's totally, I remember that, I don't know if you saw that film Gamer with, I can't remember the actors, but anyways, it's in like every movie now. What you're talking about, it's like every movie, like Tron and all these movies coming out now.
Something very quickly, isn't it? The Matrix, where they say, "Oh, I know jiu-jitsu now. I know like a helicopter or whatever. Just plug it in, you can learn it instantly."
And that's the sales pitch. That's the sales pitch. Is, hey, look what we can do. We can heal your body with these nanobots. We can expand your consciousness. We can reach this singularity. You don't ever have to think anymore. You can just Google the answers to everything. And people are going to buy this because they're already sleeping outside of Walmart the night before the new iPhone comes out, or the night before the new PlayStation comes out, or whatever it is. They know they've got people addicted to this. And because of the fact that the media is hyping up this super hyper false reality, and getting everybody brought into that, especially the young people who all have cell phones now, and who are all jacked into this. It's very easy to lead them towards something like that and sell them the benefits, because I think they've created the situation of the world being in this state of utter chaos. And so they know that people are going to disassociate from that. And there's a net just waiting for them to go exactly where they originally wanted to go. I guess you call it the Hegelian dialectic or problem reaction solution or whatever label you want to give it. But it is a strategical way of bringing about what, this ordered society, this new world order, as they're talking about. It's mind blowing when you really step back and look at it objectively.
Yeah. But that's a brilliant way you described it there, where people will be so disassociated with society that the net is there waiting for them. That Zbigniew Brzezinski talked about in his book 1970, Between Two Ages, about a technocratic era where technology would be used to control the masses. And in fact, he even talked about controlling the weather to influence society as well in that book in 1970. But they've been planning this, and you've got key people behind geoengineering funding the research like Bill Gates.
Yeah, great guy.
Eugenicist, king of the eugenicists, killing people with vaccines, creating the Microsoft empire. Obviously, that must have been, he's just a figurehead, isn't he? I mean, obviously he's got all the money, but, when you got people like Brzezinski talking in 1970 that the technology will soon be given to the public to transform society, surely he had to be talking about personal computers and the internet. Because, that is how society is being transformed, isn't it? But like I said, it's a double-edged sword.
Well, and Huxley himself was a Fabian, and he was one of the educators of Eric Blair, who was the guy, George Orwell, writing in 1984. And it seems like together, if you read those two books, 1984 and Brave New World, and you put them together, you've got the blueprint for what has been discussed at the highest levels for at least the last 100 years. But we just know that this has been one stage of upgrading. The same way they update your computer every 5 seconds is the same way they've been updating this agenda over time. Because I think they know, and let me know what you think about this, Max, because we've got about maybe 10 minutes here. I think they know that people are going to resist. They know that people are waking up to this. And I think they're rushing now at this point. They're being forced to rush towards the end goal. And in doing that, do you think they're getting sloppy, or do you think they were even anticipating this level of the resistance?
Well, I believe they certainly did anticipate this. I know that there's I think it's Vision 2035. It's a British MOD paper where they talk about the middle classes starting to form rebellious groups and having flash mobs and things like this. So I think they've always been aware that people will wake up to this. I think the problem for them is that we're waking up a bit faster than they anticipated. And this is an all-or-nothing exercise for them. And, the problem is, like I said, it works by mass deception. As soon as the deception is revealed, it stops working. And so the more people that wake up to this and understand what's going on, to all their research, it starts to fall apart for them because they lose all their credibility. They end up standing in the spotlight as insane despots.
Yeah.
And this is the thing. Sometimes I kind of think there's a spiritual element to this as well, because I know they whether or not they believe in Satan, they certainly worship Satan as part of their secret societies and everything else.
Yeah, they're definitely into that.
Freemasons and everything else.
Yeah.
And I think that there is whether you like it, whether anyone is religious or not. I'm an ex-Catholic. I'm not a Catholic or anything. I was brought up as a Catholic. I don't believe in the dogma and the indoctrination, but I do believe there is something spiritual in this universe, and there is something that binds us. And I think that basically there is an awakening, a collective consciousness, if you like, not in a New World Order sense, but in the sense that we all are discovering gifts about humanity that we perhaps lost or forgotten or has been hidden from us.
Yeah.
And something is happening. We're all communicating. We're all connecting, not just through computers, but on a mental level, on a site, using our minds, as meeting of minds going on in the ether, if you like.
Well, funny you're bringing that up, because we were talking about how they have done these experimentations with technologies like HARP, that would be able to manipulate the ionosphere and also manipulate human brain waves, that in itself is actually proof that there is a connection there between the Earth, the Sun, human consciousness, and the whole connection and the connectivity that underlies everything. Otherwise, that really wouldn't work, would it? So, in a way, yes, they're using that. They know this and they're using it for nefarious purposes. But we can also realize that we're also seeing that they're trying to keep us divided and use that knowledge against us, which means we just have to turn that round, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I really think that the way I think about it is that people can wake up to this, and there's not that many of them really, and it works by our ignorance, by us not understanding. But once we educate ourselves and the mass deception is lifted, then they really are in trouble. They're really in trouble, and that they will come undone. But I think there's more about humanity. And I actually think that we're more advanced in the past, because I'm a builder, I've got an interest in the ancient buildings, and I don't believe it's by aliens. I think it's by us, by humans. And I think that basically something's happened, whether it's a catastrophe or whether it was a group of people that destroyed what was there. And there is no doubt in my mind that there is knowledge from the past that is hidden, that is made. The Royal Society is designed to keep science away from the public, to control the release of technology so that those in the oligarchy can stay in power.
That's right.
And the problem is, with us all waking up, something is happening to us. Something is actually consciously changing people. They're becoming more aware. They're more in contact, like in a telepathic way. You can think of someone and they'll contact you, or you'll come across something from them. There's a connection there. There's synchronicity. That certainly works. Positive intention. You're thinking about something, and then something will come your way. That's exactly what you wanted. That's kind of like us connecting with the universe and using those electromagnetic frequencies to connect. And I think that is a fundamental thing. And maybe it's to do with our processional orbit in the galaxy. Maybe something's happening, we've changed our position and we're now having more energy coming to us. Maybe something is happening. I really don't know, but
well, the more we're using these faculties and connecting to them, the more they're going to grow. It's kind of like, if you're trying to build muscle mass or get more cardio or whatever, the more you train your body and do the things and awaken yourself to what's needed in order to achieve that result, the faster you're going to achieve that result. You can't just sit on the couch and expect you to get that result. So maybe the same is true with how our consciousness, our connectivity, maybe we already are connected, but we're just now waking up to that. And I always maybe feel like it's like a memory. We're remembering in a way, or we're accessing that phylogenetic memory, or that, some people call it the Akashic field, or whatever term you want to give it. Rupert Sheldrake has done some great work on talking about how they did experiments with various animals and whatnot to show that this type of real internet, in a way, the organic one really exists. And it's funny that they're trying to create a synthetic one to replace that.
I think they're aware of it, I think they know these things from the past. The elites have got the documentations from the Vedic texts and from the ancient Egyptian libraries, from the Alexandria. Who knows what's in the Vatican vaults.
Oh, exactly.
And various different castles or fortresses around the world, and the people at the very top level are all working together in a club, so they're aware of the past and things that are going on, and they seem to be trying to create their own version of it. If the basically the cloud system of databasing, where you give up your information and put it into the ether, so basically it's pretty much what the Akashic record was supposed to be, or is.
They've just given you the Googleized version.
Yeah, so it's almost like they're trying to copy what's already there. And the thing is, if we start to engage in with our education and start to explore these various different possibilities, it's almost like it becomes more prominent again. And people can connect and realise we don't even need all this technology. This technology is kind of like a second-rate copy of it. What our potential is that we can communicate with anyone around the world, that we can create things. We're creators. You know, we are creators. We can make things happen. We can use synchronicity, laws of attraction, all these different things that happen in our life. When people are positive, positive things happen. You know, it's all a matter of perception, isn't it? They use propaganda to reinforce their version of reality they want us all to subscribe to keep us as prisoners.
And it's up to us to break away from that. And Max, unfortunately we're out of time here, but I just want to say, that was a great way to finish up a truly information jam-packed discussion. I must say it was a real pleasure to hear from you. I'd love to do a follow-up sometime as well and stay in touch with you. If you just want to leave everybody with any information about where they can find your work, your websites once again, or any way that they can assist you as you continue to go on this journey of putting this information out for people.
Well, yeah, I'm on Facebook, Max Bliss, or the Real Institute. Max Bliss is my page. I'm on that's Facebook. I'm on YouTube. Hopefully, I'll get my channel back. I had 10,667 subscribers and 4 million views on my videos, and that got taken down. But I'm trying to get that back, but I've started a second one up. I mean, if anyone does a search for Max Bliss, they'll probably find me. I'm just starting to develop a website, but as I was saying earlier, I'm not very technically minded. I'll do my best. It's becoming very important to me. I want to push on with that, and that's called therealinstitute.com with dashes in between the words, so it's the dash real-institute.com. And I think that's, if anyone did a Google search on Max Bliss, they'll find me.
Excellent, man. Well, hey, keep up doing the great work, man. And I really appreciate your efforts. I've loved speaking with you, and let's do it again sometime, my friend.
Yeah, yes, please. Yeah, it's been great talking to you as well, David. Thank you.
Awesome.